Through the Spirit's vivifying activity, we who seem to wobble an awful lot find our legs. And that which is dying in us gets invited into a yet new possibility of life. This is the one we're invited to trust, to place confidence in. And are we willing to move at the pace of guidance? At the pace of the guidance of this Spirit? Whenever I ask myself this question, I'm reminded about a fascinating figure from our history, Jane de Chantal. She's somebody who I think demonstrates the power of moving at the pace of guidance. She's somebody who waited with expectancy upon the movement of the Spirit in her time, tending what was a longing in her, but something that seemed to be impossible. Living in France at the turn of the 17th century, Jane de Chantal emerges as a hinge figure, standing between medieval and modern worlds. She lived in a time when the emerging nation states of the European continent were torn in warfare, when the scientific discoveries of Copernicus and Galileo were challenging existing intellectual maps, when the critique of Christianity jolted the foundations of society, and the Catholic response to the Reformation at the Council of Trent gave rise to a new militant Catholic perspective. And here was a woman arguing for a Jesus-centered, affectionate spirituality, to use her own language. Jane was the daughter of a noble family, and because her mother died when Jane was very young, she was raised by her father and her aunt. She married a baron, and it was a happy match. The couple had 6 children, and 2 weeks after the youngest was born, Christophe, her husband, was killed in a hunting accident, leaving her a widow. The death was unexpected. She went through a very long grieving process. And she came to sense over time that she did not want to marry again, but rather to follow what had been a strong religious impulse all along, to join an intentional religious community. But how could this be? There were no religious communities for people with children who wanted to give themselves to prayer and service. What a strange nudging, she felt. Enter Francis de Sales, a wonderful man who became Jane's spiritual director, and over time her dear friend. Francis encouraged her, believed that this inner nudge that she felt was authentically of God's Spirit. He assured her that the deepest desire of her heart was trustable, and he advised her to cherish this desire and to tend it, to nurture it in heart. He described her vision as a spark of divine flame and reminded her that every day presented opportunities for her desire to mature and ripen. Now, Jane, who recognized her motherhood as the central dimension of her spirituality, motored on, tending this holy longing, which she came to believe for herself was of God. The phrase, "Live Jesus," a very famous Salesian phrase, became for her a mantra for the making of her heart a vessel through which God could enter the world according to God's pace. In 1619, several years later, Jane de Chantal and Francis co-founded the Congregation of the Visitation of Holy Mary, which was a community for women who felt attracted to religious life, but were not sufficiently young or robust or free from family ties or the raising of children, or simply were not drawn to the physical austerity that characterized many religious orders for women at the time. Here was a very different model of religious life, something brand new, a possibility for those who did not fit the caste or the prereqs regarding religious life in Jane's time. Jane herself, in this style of intentional religious community, was able to move in and out of community life, visiting the sick and poor, giving herself in spiritual direction, writing, counseling, and taking care of her children in this new style of intentional Christian community. This new moment, this new style of religious community, this charism of the visitation caught the imagination of many. Here was a community model that obviously attracted, so much so that by the time Jane died in 1641, there were already 86 visitation houses in existence. Jane de Chantal kept an open-eyed watchfulness and waited upon the movement of God regarding something that belonged to the future and required tending before it could come to be. Back to you for a few moments. As you seek glad and practical cooperation with God's Spirit, what do you find yourself tending these days? Are you willing to move at the pace of guidance, as Jane de Chantal did? What might we learn here?